All right, to become a welder, you have got to have a well-defined Copenhagen ring on your back pocket, and you got to wear your hat to the side, always. But getting serious, this video is going to be for anyone that wants to learn how to weld a 7018 stick rod, whether you're a novice, a beginner, or whoever. You know, there might be some information there for someone that's been welding for maybe a year that, you know, that needs a little help or whatever. But I'm going to take you all the way back to my roots. When I learned how to weld, I went to a Vodtech at a local junior college over in Goshen, Mississippi, and the very first thing they started me out on was stick welding. It was with a 60-10 rod, and it was on 1/2-inch T-plates. And we ran downhand over and over and over, bead after bead, both sides. I mean, that thing was so warped looking by the time the instructor would tell you to throw it away and grab a new one. And you would actually do that every night until you got very proficient at running that downhand 60-10. Then from there it went to vertical. Same thing, just weld and weld and weld and weld to where he felt confident that you had this. Then overhead. All right, by the time you get through your overhead, you think, all right, I'm gonna move into pipe now. No, wrong. We moved into 7018, and from there, same thing, over and over and over and over. And let me tell you, you'll get good in a hurry when you do something that much. You'll learn how to fine tune that amperage. You'll know exactly what to look for by the time you're done. And I moved through that program pretty quick. It took me 3 months from not knowing anything to actually welding pipe. 3 months. And there was a lot of, and I ain't tooting my own horn, but there were people that will never make good welders. Some people just won't. I don't know why. It's like they can't wrap their head around it. I literally knew this one guy had been in there for 2 solid years and still fighting with T-plates. I'm just saying. But most people can pick up on it pretty easy. So in this video, I'm going to start you off same way, but instead of 60-10, I'm doing 70-18. We're doing flat or downhand. We're doing vertical. We're doing overhead. And I'm going to quit talking, and we're just going to go ahead and jump right into it. But, and this is a big but, I've got to tell you about the rod first. Might take a few minutes to get through everything I got to say, but I promise you, right after that, we're going to do some welding. All right, so I was talking about T-plates. I've already taken some 3/8 steel, you see right here, and I made a T-plate. I've tacked it on each end, and this is what we're going to be welding on. Now, I've got more of this, but there's no sense in wasting it. I should be able to show you how to weld downhand with this rod, how to actually stop in the middle, and how to make the tie-ins in all 3 positions, flat, vertical, and overhead. But first, let me tell you about this rod here. So here is a 3/32 7018, my favorite rod. Now these come in various sizes, everything from 3/32 all the way up to 1/4 of an inch, and possibly even bigger. Certain makes might make them bigger, but for what I do, the most I've ever had to weld is a 1/8 or 3/32. On occasion, I've used 5/32, like if I had a bunch of pipe doublers, downhand, I would use that bigger rod just to speed the welds up. But these numbers, this AWSC, that is American Welding Society, E stands for electrode, 70 is the pounds per square inch. That is 70,000 pounds per square inch. The 1 represents all positions. The positions I just mentioned, flat, vertical, overhead, it will do all of these. And 8 represents the composition of this actual flux itself. Now the way this any stick rod works, as you're burning this flux creates a gas that shields the puddle, hence why they call it shielded metal arc welding. It actually shields the puddle because any welding process, I don't care what it is, has to be shielded from the air that like we breathe. It will definitely mess up the puddle, it'll mess up the metal, you can't do it. So it's got to have some sort of gas to actually weld in. So as this rod burns down, this will be creating its own gas. Now like TIG welding and MIG welding and all like that, it has inert gas that flows over the weld doing the same thing. It's just protecting the weld puddle itself. Just about every container of rods is going to tell you somewhere on here the range, and here it is right here. It says 70 through 120 amps, and they give you that range because it really depends on the thickness of the metal. This T-plate is 3/8 of an inch. If that was 1/2 inch, I would have to run at a little bit higher amperage. It's not what the amperage takes to burn this rod, because it's going to burn too cold on the thicker the metal gets. It might run really hot or perfect at one thickness, but when you try it on a thicker plate, it's going to be a lot colder welding, so you have to adjust your current. But what I like to do is I like to take a piece of scrap that's the same thickness, and I'll go ahead and set my machine that way. But welding downhand, you can get away with running a higher amperage than what you can on vertical. You do have to cut it back on vertical, and overhead you can run it pretty much like you do your downhand. Not a lot of difference there, but your vertical, you're really fighting against gravity, so you can't have it too hot. Now flat, gravity works with you. Now overhead, gravity is not really working with you, it's definitely working against you. But once you start welding it, you'll see. That was really one of the hardest ones for me to learn, was the overhead, mainly because I never knew how to position my body to get out from under it. Now I use a 7018 3/32 the most. I'm a pipe welder by trade, and that's primarily what we use, even though, like I said, there's times I will bump up to a 1/8. But you can control that puddle so much better with a 3/32 rod, but it's not for everything. It really depends on what you're using. You know, if I had some really heavy wall, whatever, that's not going to cut it. You're definitely going to have to move up to like a 1/8, which welds just as good. It's just a slight difference, and it doesn't take long to get used to either one of these. It's just all about what you're used to, really, or what you can get used to. Now this rod, 7018, is a low hydrogen rod. It has to be preheated. These just come out of my toaster oven. I keep them in these packages until I know I'm getting ready to weld. And about 2 hours in advance, I'll set that toaster oven. It's a dedicated toaster oven. I'll set it at 250 degrees, and that just drives all the moisture out of this. All right, I think I've explained enough about the rod itself. But before I start, the one thing you want to look for is, once you start this arc, you want to form your puddle. And one of the first things you got to learn is know how to identify the puddle from the slag that's running off of it. So the slag is going to be pouring off the backside. That's the reason you've got to angle your rod like this. It's not as critical on flat, this angle. I normally go somewhere right in here or maybe in here. But when you get in overhead, I'll explain that when I get to it. But at any rate, you want to look at that glossy puddle, and you'll see the slag blowing behind it. The arc force from this rod will push the slag off the molten metal, and all you do is just watch that puddle, try to keep it the same height, width, depth, everything about it as you advance. Now, unlike a wire fed, you have to constantly be pushing this rod in as it's being consumed, you know, and that just takes a little getting used to. But with a wire fed, you hold that nozzle there the whole time, you just advance forward. But with this, it's different. You have to constantly feed that in as it's needed. All right, I think it'd be better for me just to show you instead of rambling on like I'm doing. So the very first trick in welding is you've got to be comfortable. And it's hard to weld out in the open like this without shaking. You know, some people are more steady than others. So I would recommend get propped up, get good control of your stinger here. That's a stinger, and the rest of this is called a stick whip. That's what we call it. Now I've got this set at 95 amps. I'm going to try it there. I didn't use a piece of scrap like I recommended you to do. I would primarily do that if this was an actual test piece or something I want to show an instructor or something like that. But this is scrap to me. All right, so get your rod in your stinger, and what I'll recommend is you want to start back a little bit, maybe a 1/2 inch. Start there and then drag it here and start your welding. And the reason being, a lot of times on a cold startup, it'll blow a lot of porosity into the weld. And if you start here and drag it back real quick, it gives the rod time to heat up, plus you'll burn back over that porosity. So I don't have an auto darkening lens in this, and that's kind of what I've gotten used to, but we're going to go for it anyway. Now I don't know if you can see that flux blowing on the back side of that puddle. That's what it's doing. It's actually a pretty good heat. You want to make sure you're not undercutting on that top toe. You see I am oscillating a little bit up and down, mainly just trying to get the width that I want. Alright, we're going to stop right there, and I'm going to show you how to make this tie-in. First I'll explain it. And so you know, BBs like these right here is never acceptable. I mean, you're going to get them. You can't prevent that. The hotter you weld, the more you're going to get. But you cannot leave that weld with them in place. You got to do whatever it takes to get them off. You might even have to take a grinder to get them off. Alright, same thing with this tie-in. You want to jump ahead a little bit and then come back in. And don't start it here at the bottom. This top edge right here, this shelf, you want to bring this all the way in and kind of do this number right here. Then you're right back in it. If you didn't understand that, you want to start your arc somewhere up in here, drag to it quickly, come right here to this top edge where this shelf is, come right here and just do your loop. Loop it down, then you can just start welding. If you get good at that, you can't even tell where you started or stopped. Yeah, I'll tell you what, these little Harbor Freight Vulcan rods do pretty good. And for the record, I am using my Prime Weld 225X TIG welder, which obviously it will stick weld also. Now a lot of times I like to take this rod, I get a better bite like this sometimes. I'll come in here like this, then I'll bend it. That's just my kind of preferred method. Alright, let's jump up here. So one thing I haven't really discussed yet is arc length, and what arc length is exactly what it says. Your puddles here, your rod should be as close as you can get it without actually sticking it. A rule of thumb, now I don't really follow that, is whatever the diameter of the wire is how far the rod should be from the puddle. 1/8 rod here, they're saying about 1/8, that's pretty close. But I try to tuck it in. Matter of fact, I'll feel this slag on the back, I'll feel it bump the back side of that weld sometimes. That's how close I am. That cuts down on porosity, it stops it from blowing, and it stops it from undercutting, and that's just the way you want to do it. Now I'll tell you what, 7018s don't always like to be the first pass. Sometimes it'll kind of eat out and all that, but this is doing really well. And as I mentioned earlier, you don't want to keep these BBs. I mean, you're going to get them. Just make sure you knock them off if you're on a job site. You do not want to leave any of that behind. This chisel is not getting them, so I'll have to grind all that off. And I'll do that at the end. I'll clean it up and I'll show you what we got. But that's just the root pass. Now I could go over this with 2 different passes, and I might do that right now before we move into vertical. Just gonna run through it real quick. All right, here we go. There's the root pass, there's that bottom pass, there's that top pass. Now, as I was going across there, the one thing you gotta look for, especially on that top one, is if you're going to undercut, it's gonna be on that top toe right there. So if you see it undercutting, you gotta pause and hold it there and keep a close arc to make sure that fills up. But anyway, that's 3 stringer passes. Get you a different angle here. I love the way this machine welds. It does really good. All right, let's move on to vertical. And I would just encourage you to run some rods. The more you burn, the more you learn. So this is the same piece. The down hand is on its back side. I was actually going to do 1 pass, then a vertical over it. But you've seen what I did. I got 2 passes over 1. And that's the way you would stack them. So now I'm going to do the vertical on this side, just 1 pass. Then I'll come back in the overhead position and put 2 over it. And I did knock my heat down to 90 amps. Let's see what that does. It actually could have been a little hotter on that down hand. I probably could have got away with 100 amps, no problem. So we'll see what we got here. Now, same thing, when you start up, you want to start in here and drag down. That gives that rod time to heat up, and by the time you get here, you got a nice close arc, and you can run right back over that little bit that you did coming down. And if there's any porosity holes in that, it'll burn it out. All right, here we go. Just side to side. You want to pause on each side and let that undercut fill up. Maintain a close arc, same width, same height, and that's what takes experience and practice. Don't put the death grip on your stinger, just relax. The more you relax, the easier it gets. I hope I'm not blocking that 1 arc. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and pull out. Now I'm gonna show you how to do that tie-in. Now a lot of times on this vertical, I don't even knock the slag off, because you can see you got shiny metal here. I might do it right here on the very top, because you want to tie in. Again, you want to come down and catch that top shelf and just do your loop, then you're right back off to the races. Oop, that's a 1/8. I don't want a 1/8. I might show you on another video running 1/8. I recommend this one for beginners because it's so easy to control. It don't pile up on you as bad as the 1/8, but you do need to learn 1/8 and bigger. This will get you going now. All right, so I'm gonna start my arc up here, drag down to it. You can see how close that arc is. Now if you're too hot, you'll know it, because you'll start piling up and you'll be undercutting. And I'm about out of rod. That's as far as I'm gonna bring it up. Vertical is really easy once you get used to it. You just got to keep a close arc. You do have to angle your rod down because you're wanting that arc force to go upwards. There again, you're fighting gravity. Just take and knock our slag off. And that looks pretty darn good. I can't even see my tie-in. Of course, I am blind. Might look like crap and I just don't know it. All right, so I've already got the root in because that's the vertical weld. But I want to put 2 stringers in here. You would start at the bottom. Now the angle is not going to be as critical because I'm welding more on this side here than this side. Now if I had to put that root pass in there, you'd want that angle more up like 15, 20 degrees. You don't want no extreme angle because it makes you cold roll here. You got to remember you're fighting gravity more on this overhead. So you kind of got to keep that arc force going up like this, but still be able to tie into your bottom. Kind of wish I'd have held off on that vertical and showed you that, but I think you understand. All right, I'm gonna stop right there because what I don't want to do now is drag it back to me to show you that you can go in either direction. That looks pretty good, the best I can see. We're gonna reuse the same rod. Well, no, I'm not because I want it to tie in. A lot of times you'll go, you know, one side or the other. I can actually probably sit better coming towards me than what I could leaving me just then because I'm back behind it. All right, so that puddle is going to dictate, that's going to dictate everything you do, the speed you're going, everything about it. You can slow down, pile it up more if you want to. All right, now let's go ahead. I tell you what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna kick it up. I am gonna run a 1/8. I'm gonna go ahead and kick my power up to about 125, grab a 1/8, and we'll finish that top off and this video will be done.
A little hot. You see the angle I'm using?
Okay, I probably could have ran that about 5 degrees cooler. That's part of welding, to know when you're a little too hot or too cold, but it should look all right. The hardest part about overhead is just having a cricky neck up like that. And I do have a bad neck. I wasn't joking about that. All right, that's it. Hope you got something from all this. 7/18s are a really good welding rod. And like I said earlier, the more you burn, the more you learn. And the more you do it, the better you get. I used to really slick a 7/18 on there. Still not too shabby for a 65-year-old half-blind dude. So at any rate, thanks for watching. And next week, I'll be coming to you with another review on another scan tool.